we go.
Yeah, here we go. Welcome to episode 53 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitrov. Thomas, firstly, we're in an interesting spot now. It's 4 o'clock Eastern, right? Because you got a dinner you had to go to. I'm in my living room right now because I'm moving to Atlanta at the end of the month, and my space is all like discombobulated and has a bunch of things gone. So my kids are about to like walk through the door here at like 4:10 or so, yelling and screaming. So I feel like we're in a point of transition here. We just got out of the draft, and I can't wait to talk a little bit of football with you today.
Well, don't bemoan me for the heresy on my screen in the back there, I guess, right? For those who aren't soccer fans. I do like European soccer. And by the way, Sumer, one day I would love for Sumer to be involved with that. That's a whole other plug. It's funny because coming back into this place after the draft, there was still garbage here. There was still stuff, like for some reason, this office needed to be cleaned up. So I'm going to give full on kudos to Chase Fallavine for cleaning it up today because it looks really good. We're in a good spot. Can't wait to talk a little bit of football. I know it's going to be a fairly short trip today, so to speak, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's funny because there are tales of Michael Jordan playing with the flu and so on. I think both of us are a little bit under the weather just because of how stressful it's been the last few weeks. But we will soldier on, and so will these NFL teams. Now, Sumersports.com, we wrote an article last week about fifth-year options. I know I sent it your way. Firstly, we wrote that because last week, about a week ago, teams were making their decisions as to whether or not to, basically exercise the fifth-year option for a lot of these players. And I found out, Thomas, that not only did you go 8 for 10 in your fifth-year option players, 2011 to 2020, including AJ Terrell. Now, you didn't make the decision, but of course you drafted him and he was good enough to earn it. But you were like 30% above what you would expect from pick position, which I was looking back at these, since the 2020 CBA, they changed things up a little bit, right? Because before then, basically the fifth year option was the transition tag number for top 10 picks, which you rarely had to deal with when you were general manager. And then for picks 11 through 32, it was the average of the third between the third and the 25th highest paid player at the position, which is a relatively meager number. And since 2020, basically they've made it more expensive. If you are a 2-time or more Pro Bowl player on first ballot, you earn the franchise tag number. If you are a 1-time Pro Bowl player, you earn the transition tag number. And then there are a bunch of like thresholds, basically that you hit, to be, a little bit higher than that. And then bare minimum then is 3rd through 25, the average player at your position. So it's made it more expensive for all but the top 10 picks. And what you've seen is a cratering in the percentage of these fifth-year options that end up getting exercised, Thomas. And to me, it's kind of an interesting dynamic because a lot of people took this, for your friend Les Snead and said, well, that means you should trade those picks if you're among the better teams in the NFL because they don't work out anyway. And yet at the same time, like, I think it's just an interesting variable to put into our models now because it really does, make that back half of the first round kind of an interesting proposition.
It does. I'm curious, of those, you said 8 out of how many, or what was your?
You were 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Do you have them in front of you? Like, which were the 2 that we didn't exercise?
Tack McKinley was one, and I believe Vic Beasley was the other.
So think about that, everyone. That's a big talking point.
One of them led the league in sacks.
And it's interesting. No, because Vic Beasley, we did. There was someone else. Remember, okay. I took a ton of heat on the Vic Beasley exercising, and it was a tough thing for us because he was so up and down, right?
I'm actually looking this up right now because I actually looked when I was writing the article, of course. And I want to make sure that we have this properly. So your first round picks in order have been AJ Terrell, Chris Lindstrom, Calvin Ridley, Tack McKinley, which is a no, Keanu Neal, which is a yes, Vic Beasley, which is a yes, Jake Matthews, a yes, Desmond Trufant a yes, and Julio Jones. Which one of those was not picked up?
Maybe Ridley.
Maybe Ridley. I think Ridley. Maybe it was Lindstrom. Maybe Lindstrom didn't get it because of the position he played.
No, he did.
But then he ended up being a good player. And I think
it was Lindstrom got it, but you know who didn't get it was Caleb.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's right, because he was one of those. You had 2 first-round picks in 2019, so it was those two. But you think about that, like none of those players were. I mean, Tack was one that didn't end up hitting, but the other ones, it's sort of like no doubters in most cases. Now, there were some really interesting ones in this group that I want to talk to you about, because I wonder if there's any sort of decisions you'd make differently. The Washington Commanders, we're going to talk about in a little bit. They declined Chase Young's 5th-year option. Now, one of the reasons was because he made a Pro Bowl. So this goes all the way up to the transition tag number for him. He did not hit any of the playtime stuff, which is like basically 50% for all 3 years or 75% for 2 years, all that kind of stuff. But he made a Pro Bowl as a rookie, was, I think, Defensive Player of the Year as a rookie of the year.
Yep.
He doesn't make it. It's about $17.9 million. Very interesting case there, Thomas, of a player who's very clearly good, but had some injury issues. That defensive line, you paid Daron Payne, you paid Jonathan Allen. You have Montez Sweat there as well. You just drafted a corner in Emmanuel Forbes. You can't pay everybody. But to me, it feels like that's an awfully, if you can assure health for Chase Young, that's an awfully low number to turn down.
Well, I think Ron Rivera's taken some heat from the locals, right? Like, what's going on there? I think his response has been, or I believe it's been consistent, injury, of course, and, trying to decide whether, his not, moving forward with the 5th year is going to provide the impetus for Chase to work harder. I believe that Chase wasn't even rehabbing or working in the city, I believe. And what happens here normally for people who don't know is, you look at each situation very differently. Of course, you look at the financial implications, but you also look at the player. You look at the repercussions if you do or don't exercise, right? We exercised Vic Beasley. The fan base went crazy and they were agitated. Arthur Blank as an owner was, you're either here nor there. What is it? And we were thinking we were going with Vic Beasley on this because we didn't truly want him to kick into gear and do what he did in 16, right? You never know. There's such uncertainty there. The guy like Chase, where's he going to go with it, right? Is it going to kick him into gear? Is it going to provide the impetus and the light the fire element, or is it going to be something otherwise? I know you're going to get to Jordan Love because the way they did things there, I thought was very interesting, and I commend them for it. I mean, I really do. I like what they did. I laud them for their actions there, but we'll get to that. In Washington, the other thing that's interesting. There'll be 2 free agents here in 23. Is that correct? Is that what you were talking about? Two D linemen, legit free agents. I think.
So Montez Sweat and Chase Young will both be free agents after this year, with this decision being made by the Commanders. And to your point, but they put 20 million APY deals into both interior players, a situation that's tough, right? Because we've seen, I remember, even way back in the day, but it's hard to generate a pass rush just with interior players. That is a really hard thing to do. So you think that they're going to make a decision on one of these guys, but, is there ever a thought in your mind of if you make a guy angry by not exercising the option in a situation where the guy hasn't, I think about Garrett Bradbury, same thing in Minnesota. He doesn't get the option, plays okay in 2022, gets a contract, but it's not a top of the market deal. All is okay. All is forgiven, I think. But if a guy earns a top of the market deal, which would be probably what would be required in the event of Chase Young, what ends up happening? Does he always does he leave? Does he rip the eyes out of the team? What are the questions that get answered there?
Yeah, I get it 100%, and I don't know what the questions are. All I know is I just want to say this as Eric. I mean, it is not easy to make that decision because again, there are so many elements in your decision, right? And at times what's going to happen is you may divide a locker room when you do it one way or you do it the other way. Sometimes you think you're working at it and you're keeping the locker room together. People are behind them. And then you have someone in that D line group who's agitated if you do or if you don't, right? And it's not all about that. I just want everyone to know that there are a lot of layers beyond, beyond the financial elements that you have to make that aren't easy. And I know in ours, it ended up being with Vic Beasley. It was another black mark, on how we put things together, unfortunately. But again, we felt like that's what we had to do.
And back when you were doing this, right? Like he wasn't a top 10 pick, if I recall, right? Where was he taken? Like, let me make sure I'm not talking out of, when you look, Beasley was 8th. So it was a fairly sizable amount then, but it's still not like top of market, right? So it is generally speaking a deal if the player has been productive at all. The hard part becomes like if a player's been kind of productive or there's some potential there, if it truly is an in-between situation, that's where it gets hard. And that's where it gets hard with franchise tags. That's where it gets hard with really any tag because, generally speaking for these guys, like the top of the market for a lot of these players is a deal if they're truly elite. If they're not, it's not a great deal, right? And so, that's where it gets tough. But when a guy's truly in that middle part where they're elite sometimes and not the other times, like then and that's kind of like the whole Jordan Love thing, right? Jordan Love has never been elite, but he's shown like elite traits to the point where, 20 million for a guy like that's 40% of what the top of the market deal is for a quarterback. And so there is a deal there, but he hasn't shown really anything. So it's way more than a backup quarterback would make who hasn't shown anything. And so it's truly one of those in-between things. And I think with Chase Young, to finish that point off, Chase Young, you saw it in 2020. He was really good, and he like helped elevate that team into the playoffs. They played a lot of really bad quarterbacks, and so that helped. But he truly was great. And then since then, he really hasn't played. And in fact, he came back from injury a lot later than I think a lot of people surmise. So it truly was like kind of a could go either way situation.
Look, the could go either way situation is also interesting, Eric, because this may be perceived as a dirty little secret or maybe not. And where I'm going with this is GMs want their retention rate to be high, right? Let's call it the way it is. They want to be able to look back when they're going to negotiate their contract with their owners and say, we are retaining our cats, right? That's a big thing. I mean, I was always proud of my retention rate. Sometimes it's competitive. You have to do the right thing, of course. When I say dirty little secret is there is a drive that way. There is a drive to make sure, like if you're teetering on the edge as a GM, you're probably going to push to have the deal done so that it's a feather in the GM's cap that they're continuing to roll with the player that they were very responsible to pick, of course. So
yeah, it's a reward for the player as much as it is a reward for the GM. Like it's a pat on your back as far as like we made the right move. I can't, we talk about Julio Jones a lot on here, and like, what if Julio Jones had been an okay starting wide receiver? Like you probably would have been more likely to pick up his option because you put yourself such on the line there that you would probably try to contribute, like not nefariously or not. But like subconsciously, you want him to do better than his, than he would have otherwise been because, you put so much into that trade. And, and you think about Jared Goff, you think about Carson Wentz. These are guys where everybody said, oh, well, they were a year early on giving them extensions. Well, it's like, well, yeah, but they moved up. Like LA moved up from 15 to 1 to take Jared Goff. And that's not necessarily an easy one. And Cleveland traded back with Philadelphia for Wentz, so that was a difficult situation as well, insofar as those situations are concerned.
Well, again, yeah, I don't. In no way is it nefarious. It's a good word. I think, again, there's just you sit down, and you speak with the owner about it. Of course, you think about it. You think about where the coaching staff is with it as well. You think about how it plays into your group, that group that's literally there, right? If someone's right on the edge and you're trying to decide if that guy's a really good guy, if that guy's a leader, if that guy, you're going to lean more that way. If he's a pain in the butt, if he's not a worker, if you need to hang it over his head to take it to another level, then you start contemplating the other side. But again, the quarterback situation to me is a little bit of a different situation because there's a lot of deep-seated confidence elements that are riding on this quarterback, especially as we segue into Jordan Love. I don't want to take your job, but take away from your job. I mean, that's a complicated approach, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. So to give people a little bit of a a re-up here, like Jordan Love was, his option year was 20.23 million. And the Packers, instead of giving him that, they basically made his guarantees $8 million in 2024. And the rest, sort of bumped all the way up to 22 million. So he can earn more if he hits a bunch of incentives. But in large part, he kind of bet against himself in some ways, right? Because he's going to get this $8 million up front. I don't think people realize that when you sign a rookie deal in the NFL, especially when you get past like top 10 picks or something, the signing bonus is a lot of money, but it's not that much money, like as far as, a veteran deal. So what he did was he got $8 million into his pockets right now, or so, 8 to 12. I can't remember exactly the number. And then he, basically gave himself the option to make more than that if he reaches a certain threshold over the next 2 seasons. So, it helps him, obviously, gets money into his pocket, but it also gives the Packers some stability in case, or some fallback in case he were to struggle. Because, basically, if he were to fail, the question becomes, like, are you really going to want to stomach $20 million either playing him while he's a sitting duck or moving on to a different guy? What may that be, a rookie, or the way the NFL currently is constructed, a veteran player who's making a lot more? That's a lot of money. So what they did is they chopped that number roughly in half and said, look, we're willing to pay that if he doesn't work out. And, we're willing to, hedge a little bit of our risk in case he actually is pretty good.
So while I'm talking, I'd love you to look it up. I thought he was guaranteed 13-ish, and I think it was bringing him up to the number, of course, which when you start thinking about that, when you start contemplating the fifth year, right? Are you it was at right around 22 or 23?
No, you're right. I got it switched around. So it saves the Packers $8 million in guarantees. Okay. So it's 13.5 fully guaranteed at signing. So he gets that money in his pocket. So I apologize for that. Okay. And then it's up to 22.5. So he can make another $9 million with incentives and those kinds of things. It was going to be 20.27 as the option number. So he does have the opportunity to earn more, but the Packers save some in future guarantees.
So I like the idea. And I guess what I was saying is that 22, and you probably have it somewhere as you're looking in your unbelievable portfolio of stats or quiver of stats, but I think would put him right around 20th or 19th or 18th if they would have signed him to that number. So It wasn't like it was like really, reaching. I just know that when you're a general manager and you're a coach and you've been riding, and I hate saying the coattails, that's unfortunate. I've said it before about Matt LaFleur riding, Aaron's coattails, but whatever I'm trying to say, not being derogatory, they were very fortunate to have Aaron there. This is a big, big deal for this organization to make a move and go with, Jordan and jump on board because, they're at an interesting spot in their careers, both Brian Gutekunst and I just think and the head coach, of course, I think they both are in a spot where they have to make some really sound decisions. And, I will say, I've said all along, like, wow, I can't believe they're letting him go. I want to say to everyone, when you're constantly nagged and you're constantly in a situation that is, sort of bleeding the organization of energy because of this kind of this acrimonious relationship, there are times when you're just like, man, I am over this. Let's move on. Yep. I mean, I'm taking it head on. Let's take it. Let's go. Let's clean this up. Let's let Aaron go to where he needs to go to and be great there. Maybe if he doesn't, they're going to be cheering against him every game. And I guarantee you, everyone, when Brian Gutekunst goes every morning, he is checking the stats and the situation in the Jets for this next year, because it is going to hang over his head. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I always the thing that like radicalized me about quarterback contracts was in 2020 when Joe Burrow was the first overall pick and he was making $10 million a year, and the next starting quarterback in the NFL APY was Teddy Bridgewater in your division making $20 million a year. And that gap was so astronomical to me that I was like, okay, this, and I wrote an article for PFF at the time. It's like, let's bring back a middle-class quarterback contract. Let's try to do these things. And it's funny because so the 17th highest paid quarterback is Jimmy Garoppolo. His APY is $24.25 million. That sort of represents the middle-class quarterback contract, Thomas, but the fall off is actually bigger now because the next highest paid quarterback, if you look at over the cap APY, is Bryce Young at $9.5 million. Wow. So that drop off is still so catastrophic to the point where, again, like, it's hard because do you think, like, is Jordan Love proved enough to earn what Jimmy Garoppolo makes? No. Jimmy Garoppolo has been a serviceable NFL quarterback who I think both of us would say has so many limitations you don't necessarily want to go into games with all the time, seasons with all the time. But he's certainly better than what Jordan Love has shown. And yet you're not going to get away giving him 10. And this is the fundamental difference between when the Packers had Rodgers with Favre. When Packers had Rodgers with Favre, his initial contract was 5 years, $7 million. And there was no fifth-year option. It was 5 years, $7 million. You get what you get, right? It was almost the same kind of situation you had with Matt, although, Aaron was picked at 24. So his deal was significantly less. Yeah. And so when he played his 3 years under Brett and comes up for Aaron to be the starter in year 4, you got 2 years of team control at very, very cheap numbers. So when Rodgers started to show some promise in Green Bay, they gave him a very, very modest contract after like 6 or 7 starts. And that was their edge for a while. That was their alpha for a while. They win a Super Bowl under that, all this kind of stuff. Nowadays, of course, you have 3 years with a guy and you got to make a decision on a 5th-year option. That's $20 million. And so it's an interesting thing about drafting and developing QBs, because they're not going to be like, this is not the model, right? Like you get into this very awkward situation with the Jordan Love like this, and it becomes kind of an interesting, situation, because you're if you paid Aaron Rodgers, whatever that was, $1.4 million per season on the 5-year, $7 million deal, that's an okay backup money, right? $20 million is not good backup money for Jordan Love were he to fail.
Yeah, I can see you're passionate about it. And again, as contracts have changed, right? I think it's interesting how people are going to be approaching it. And, I want to come back to, the psychology of it as well for two guys that are in an interesting spot, right? I'm talking about a GM and a head coach. If we can for a minute, that I always want to bring it back to this group of how they're dealing with it. And it's not as cut and dry. What is Mark Murphy? What is his statement on this as the president, of the Packers, right? Being as strong as he is he the one that's making the ultimate call on this and not doing it, or is it Brian? It's an interesting idea, because who's truly leading the charge there, and who has more?
Or is it Matt LaFleur who? Matt LaFleur's win percentage during the first 3 years of his career was like 100 points better than Bill Belichick, right? Like, and of course, Bill's the best of all time.
Yeah.
But when you go 13-3, and Rodgers didn't play that well in 2019, so you go 13-3, you take a guy who everybody thought was washed up, so much so that your front office drafted a different quarterback in round 1. You take, if you're Matt LaFleur, you go 13-3 with a MVP quarterback, right? I think you can take some credit for that, of course, because he was going from a dip in his play to the pinnacle again. Then you go 13-4 in 2021, and obviously you fall off and go 9-8 last year. But I think if you're Matt LaFleur, you're thinking, I want to spread my wings a little, right? I want to be able to show these people the same way that Kyle Shanahan shows us every time he takes a middle-of-the-road quarterback to the playoffs, or what Andy Reid did with McNabb and Alex Smith and Nick Foles and guys like that.
Yeah.
I think Matt LaFleur is part of this decision. I think Mark Murphy and Brian Gutekunst are part of this decision. And maybe you can tell me a little bit, because I don't know. In our conversations, you've talked about kind of having, when players can be difficult sometimes, but like Rodgers to me is just it's been difficult, right? It's not easy. And I think early on, it's sort of like a relationship, right? You deal with high maintenance people, but over time, that person's got to go to a different person who can deal with that high maintenance, right? And that's certainly what happened with Rodgers here.
So, man, there's so much to talk about with that. I would say, first of all, remember all the banter about Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, right? We keep that kind of as an overriding theme here. You made mention that in Matt LaFleur's case, he might want to spread his wings. All due respect, he also is very aware of what got him there. Now, I know you were defending him in your own way, saying, Aaron wasn't playing that well, but I'm a firm believer that Aaron Rodgers is one of the very best quarterbacks to ever play. So even when he's not playing that well, he's playing a hell of a lot better than most people in the league. Mm-hmm. We could argue that. Again, back to the psychology of it, where like Matt and Brian had to take all kinds of crap from Aaron, right? It was a tough situation. Yeah. I've never had to go through that. I was very fortunate. Then you have Matt LaFleur. Everyone's lauding Matt for all of his records, which are amazing to your point, right? Now we go into a situation, everyone's going to be on him when he loses a game 2, 3, or 4, or 5, potentially, that, this was all Aaron Rodgers, right? He's not going to break through that one way or another. He's going to have to deal with it, right? He keeps Aaron and he keeps winning. It's all because of Aaron. He loses. Yes, there's a positive side if he flourishes with Jordan, but then there they are not making a full-on decision to keep Jordan. So there is, call it the way it is, there is some question mark about Jordan in their minds. Yeah. They're not, I know they can say, well, they're saving some money, but look, in the end, if they had all the confidence in the world and they were really excited about going forward, in my mind, I'd answer it for them, they would have made the deal. So
you wonder how many ways there are for, you talk about how many, we talk about this in business, we talk about this everywhere. How many ways are there for you to win? If there's only one way for you to win, that's tough. If there's multiple ways for you to win, whether you're at the poker table or your business or whatever, that's great. I agree with you. Like, think about this. If Jordan Love plays really well, you should have known ahead of time. You were the only one who had the eval on him the last 3 years. Yeah. If Jordan plays poorly, then it's like, well, you were the only one who had the eval on him. Like, what the hell? Didn't you not know? And then if Aaron goes to New York and kills it, then, to your point, it's like, how can't you get along with a player that good, right? You look at the Jets and they're kind of doing everything Aaron wants, and I get that, and I think that's their only option. That's their only way to win, is to make Aaron happy. But from the Packers' perspective, there's some things that could make them look poor. That's a rough situation. I personally, I like the Packers. They were always a great client when I was at PFF. I think that they have great people in that building. I want them to succeed, but it's tough because Jordan Love, like, it's going to be sight unseen for him, and so far, we've had very little in the way of evidence that he's any good. I want to skip over because I want to just leapfrog to this topic because you never had to deal with this as a GM. And I think it's partially because you put yourself in such a great spot with Matt. Washington's going into this season with Sam Howell, a 5th-round pick, as their starter. Yeah. And I went back over the weekend and looked at similar situations, and I couldn't find very many. 2021, the Eagles went into the season with Jalen Hurts. Like, for one, he was a 2nd-round pick, and 2, he started some games. And, 2002, our friend, your friend Casario went into the season with Davis Mills, but Davis Mills played a lot of the season before. Not on purpose, but played the season before. Yes. 2020, Gardner Minshew started for the Jags, but he started as a rookie, right? So that's another one where he played a lot. Was promising, so he played the next year. Made a lot of sense. Russell Wilson in 2012, that was one, but he was a rookie and beat out Matt Flynn, a highly paid guy that they brought in. The only one that to me is even close to this is the 2016 Broncos, who started Trevor Siemian, a 7th-round pick who had played one game the year before in their Super Bowl year. Manning retired. But even then, at this time for the Broncos in 2016, they were planning on starting Mark Sanchez. So this is, for the Washington Commanders, in modern NFL history, unprecedented to play a 5th-round rookie who has, to his name, one game. Martin Mayhew's been there since 2021. Martin Mayhew, by the way, is starting corner on Washington's last Super Bowl team. Ron Rivera since 2020. Ownership's brand new. What is happening here? Like, what is the thought process here? Because I can see Sam Howell being decent, but I don't know if Sam Howell would be anybody in the league's first choice if they had, sort of their druthers.
No, I was talked to about this with one of the DC stations, and they're like, what was your evaluation of Sam? And I said, look, I mean, my personal opinion is, I didn't study him as much, being completely candid, as much as I could have studied him. Of course, like a lot of us, I see him as he has the potential to win games and be good, solid. And we've talked about some of those midline starting quarterbacks that are never going to be great. And that's not being derogatory towards him. There are benefits. He's a fifth rounder. They obviously see something that is of interest to them. I find it really interesting, though, like you just said, to go in. Last year, what were his stats last year, by the way?
He played in literally the last game of the year. Yeah. They did beat Dallas, and they beat Dallas handily. Dallas needed that game, so it was a real game. But Dallas kind of gave them that game as far as points. They gave him a lot of like defensive touchdowns and stuff. Howell was, for the most part, he had 169 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. So you're talking. This is a slate that is clean, right? And the one I think difference here, and I wonder if this is a little bit of a similar thing with LaFleur that we just talked about a second ago. Eric Bieniemy is the new offensive coordinator there. Never got a chance to be a head coach. A lot of people wanted him to be a head coach. There are reasons, both I think normal and not normal, why he didn't get a head coaching job. A lot of people feel that he could be the heir apparent here if things weren't to work out with Ron Rivera. Bieniemy's got a lot to prove. When he got to Kansas City, he was the running backs coach. Then he became the OC. And when he was the OC, Patrick Mahomes, that was the first year Mahomes was the quarterback. Mahomes wins an MVP, wins two of them, wins 2 Super Bowls. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, but how hard is it to be the offensive player for Andy Reid? Right. And yet there have been plenty of other people who have had success in that role, Doug Peterson, namely, I think the top one. So I think Bieniemy, this could be a situation where Bieniemy is setting himself up to prove himself as his acumen as a play caller, as a developer of an offense. To me, that's the one thing I can see is like, hey, Eric, you scouted him when he was at North Carolina. I know he fell off his final year. We took him in round 5. Can you make this work? He's like, yeah, sure, boss. And to me, I don't know necessarily if that's a great recipe for success.
By the way, first time in our lives together I've ever heard a dog bark in your house.
I know. I got the Sammy Watkins named after the legendary Chiefs wide receiver. Threw out a bark there. Wanted a treat, but yeah.
Maybe things are going awry there a little bit. You're not feeling that well. Your dog's barking. Everyone's thinking about you moving to Atlanta, and it's just a little bit uneasy. I get it. Back to your point. Look, I want to present this idea too while we're talking about how you presented it. There is a chance that new ownership comes in, sits down with Ron, sits down with Martin Mayhew, the general manager, and says, "Look, this is a really interesting year to this is a watch come and watch year for you guys, and this could be intimated to them, and it could be we're not going to invest in a quarterback right now that for whether it was free agency or whatever it was, when we're not sure the direction of this organization. Go with what you have or create." I know this sounds odd, and I'm sorry, Ron, if you're listening, which you probably aren't, and Martin, you're probably not, but there is a side of that, like a hypothetical side. I'm thinking, how would I deal with that if an owner came to me and said, "Look, it's precarious moving forward. We know that. We don't want you to invest in a new quarterback that a new group would come in that wouldn't like, and they're hamstrung with a new quarterback." They've had that there before, right? Not under this ownership. They've had situations like that. So let's go with it this year. Show us what you can do with what you have, and then we'll make decisions after that. That's a tough spot.
You make such a good point because you think about the history of the Washington football team, right? Like, you get in, like Joe Gibbs takes over, like the second time, like after being a Hall of Fame coach, comes over, takes in, like they went with Mark Brunell, a veteran who was kind of whatever at that point in time. Then, you have McNabb going with the Shanahans, and then you have RG3. But then when Jay Gruden took over, RG3 was a holdover. And they tried and RG3 just didn't have it. So then they went with Cousins, right? And then, and you look at this franchise, Ron Rivera takes over. Who was the guy that was there when Jay Gruden got fired? Dwayne Haskins, right? Another team's draft pick, or another regime's draft pick. And, Alex Smith, it was an unfortunate thing with Alex Smith getting injured because I thought he was playing well and like all this stuff. And it's just been a snake bitten franchise from the perspective of quarterback play, that maybe they're just going to let it bleed. I look, I think about the NFC and I think about the schedules, and they had an easy schedule last year, which is why a lot of people like betting they're over. This year, obviously you had their schedule. Dallas was a playoff team last year. New York was a playoff team last year. Philadelphia was a playoff team last year. You also have the AFC East on your schedule, which again, Jets with Rodgers, Bills with Allen. You have Tua Tagovailoa and kind of a good, Dolphins team and a New England team that's never easy to beat as well. They get Seattle, they get Arizona, they get Los Angeles Rams, they get the Niners. Those two tough teams on that schedule. And then they come to Atlanta. They go to Denver, who I think will be improved under Sean Payton. So maybe they just look at this schedule and say, very like the opposite of what Minnesota did last year, say, this is not easy. And if we inject a ton of capital into a quarterback in a year where everybody else is doing the same thing, it might not work. And so I look at that. It's almost the exact opposite reasoning. I'm going to talk a little bit about your former team because the Falcons are doing a similar thing. They're going with Desmond Ridder, a guy. Now, Ridder started 4 or 5 games last year, 4 games. So it's not completely sight unseen. It's a lot like Jalen Hurts. And I look at this Falcons team. The Falcons have one of the easiest schedules in the NFL going into the season. They play in an easy division. They play an easy off-division schedule. So they're almost – it's more of a different hypothesis for them because they're saying, look, we like Ridder. We think he can succeed in these circumstances. And if he does, then you have a third-round rookie making third-round money. And now all of a sudden you're the Eagles again, right? Because you have a quarterback making almost no money who's a dual threat. And you're building, right? Because they got Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, the safety from Jesse Bates. They're kind of building a thing there, and I think it's a totally different reason for the Falcons to do almost the same thing that Washington's doing.
They're at a really interesting spot in their development. When you talk about Arthur Smith, who I've said many times is a really talented coach and really smart. You have Terry Fontenot, good man, good approach. He works well with Arthur, as I understand. He's got full on endorsement from Mickey Loomis, even though they're supposed to be enemies, when you're talking about, but he used to be, obviously a big part of New Orleans and what they're doing down there. They also have, by the way, not only Terry Fontenot there, they have Ryan Pace, who's a former GM from Chicago, who I think is another really good football person. So they have a lot of good football people there, and yet they're in their 3rd year, and it's an important year, right? Decisions. Arthur Blank now, the owner, he's a competitive guy. He's given this group the wherewithal. They obviously invested heavily in free agency, right? They've done their job and flexed their muscles in the draft to provide, maybe provide the tools with a tight end. With a receiver, I'm talking about a top notch. And then I love Bijan Robinson. I don't, did I think he was going to go to the Patriots or somewhere in the 14s and 15s? Maybe. But I think there's no doubt in my mind that everyone in that organization, Rich McKay included, along with that group, sat down and said, look, historically, we did it with Matt Ryan and Michael Turner. We have a guy here right now who is unproven. We're gonna ride this. We're going to have to put the right pieces around them and make the move. Now, again, Arthur Blank is a winner. He is a competitor, right? He's not a guy that's going to wait 5 and 6 years. He expects this is a really, really important year for the crew and co, so to speak. And I believe they have the pieces to do it. Now, they're going to have to do it, of course, to keep Arthur in a good spot where Arthur continues to be very supportive of this organization. But you're right, Terry, as a GM there, this is a really important time. And I say this not only about Terry, I say this about anyone who are in their third and fourth year, right? As a GM, those are the years where you can make it or break it, right? And you take some steps there, which hopefully they're going to do here. And then he continues to hit stride and things are going to continue to, proceed with him and things are going to be really good. And this city will be happy, and they'll be even happier for me when they see me, because they're going to say, okay, we got over, some of the humps from the financial situation, which is a whole other topic, and good for those guys. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, like a lot of these things, Arthur has always wanted, for example, the Falcons to spend up to the cap, and they've always wanted, those kind of things. And you look and say, this could have been a year where you kind of bled out, not bled out, but you could have kind of moved stuff to the future. And instead, we just saw Mike Hughes. They're actually, I tweeted this out, very similar to the 2021 Bengals and how they've approached the secondary. Mike Hughes, a former first-round pick. Jeff Okudah, a former first-round pick. Trey Flowers, a former starter in the league they just signed today. Like, I think, they're putting their money where their mouth is as far as, I think edge rusher might be a place where they're going to struggle, but there's not as many holes on that team as there were just last year even. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, a mandate to win. And so when I look at the Washington Commanders versus the Atlanta Falcons, I see two similar approaches at quarterback for two totally different reasons, for two decision makers who are at the exact same place. And to your point about the third and fourth year, the median, length of a general manager in the NFL is 4 years, right? So you're right at that point. And like for your situation, you were in, by year 4, you were in the playoffs and in the, hosting a conference title game. So there was never that issue with you. But for a lot of these guys, Joe Douglas included, right? He takes a totally different approach to QB. Yeah. But like this decision matters a lot. And I wonder if when it comes to the Falcons being able to take Levis at 8, the Washington being able to take Levis at 16, and you're saying, but am I drafting some other guy's quarterback? And I think both teams would say yes. If you were to draft and like totally change it up and deal with the ebbs and flows, most quarterbacks when they come into the league are not Matt Ryan right away. So when you take a guy and he sort of dips for the first year, then you might get let go, and then it's another guy, having sort of the two-way go. They can stay with your guy or they can go with their own guy, but that's a much better position than drafting the other person's guy.
Look, there's always going to be talk, in Atlanta about, have taken a quarterback there. Where are they this time? Why didn't they take a quarterback? Why didn't they make a move on Lamar? There's always going to be that going, churning around in Atlanta. And I know the Atlanta fan base. They're a smart fan base. They understand football, and they have grand expectations, as much as people think, well, Atlanta doesn't have, the history, et cetera, et cetera. No, I mean, this group wants a winner here. And as I understand, they really like Terry. They really like what Arthur Smith's doing here with his toughness, and their decision-making is going to be a really important thing moving forward. And they do have Arthur Blank's support. I've heard him in the media. So that's a good thing when you're making these tough decisions, when your owner's behind you. That's important versus someone, pulling the strings, the puppet strings, and they're like hanging and in your ear all the time. I know that Arthur does give them their space, and he's definitely, even though it's year 3, he's definitely given their space.
Yeah, we know in business and in sports and in even quarterbacking, like if you're a quarterback and the coach doesn't believe in you and all of those things, or the coach believes in you but doesn't give you freedom. Like there's all these kinds of things where I think that there is like a very functional relationship, in a lot of these places, and I hope to see them succeed. Washington has had a lot of unforced errors on the ownership side that you look at coach and GM. Like, have they ever gotten a fair shake is a good question. Hopefully now that, new ownership is coming in, you see Mayhew and Rivera, two, good football guys, two defensive stars from the late 80s, early 90s and NFL getting their opportunities. So I know both of us are a little bit under the weather today. I think we got some good football talk in. I'm really excited for what's to come Wednesday. I'm actually going to Atlanta tomorrow. So I gotta take some emergency and all that kind of stuff so I can make it onto the plane and not spread the flu to anybody. But we will have Parker Fleming and guest on Wednesday again this week. We'll kind of be transitioning a little bit into one episode of me and Thomas and then one episode of other people. for a decent amount of the summer, just because, you guys deserve to hear some other people talk about other things. Quinn McLean was fantastic last Wednesday talking about quarterback analysis and stuff like that. So we're going to continue to give you guys what you want there. There's such a really good and deep bench at Sumer Sports. So we hope that you guys will get to get some of that. We thank you for all of the support you gave us on the live show. We got over 20,000 people engaging with the live show at last during the draft. We had 25,000 or so engaged with Thomas's GM journey stuff. So we really appreciate your support. If you can, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Give us a 5-star review. Even give us just a written review so we can read it on air. We really do appreciate all of you that are coming in and listening to the Sumer Sports Show. Thomas.
Can I get just one shout out before, because I know you get rolling with your exit and you do such a great job. I don't know if I would get tongue tied doing it. I was at the University of Guelph. No one knows that probably in the States, but it's just outside of Toronto, a great school, about 25,000 strong. I was there with a whole bunch of alumni and we were talking football, we were talking NFL, et cetera, et cetera. I ran into this. I just want to say this because there's such an interested group in the senior group. So that younger group, I'm going to shout out here for Afram Jolak and his seniors there, because they were so intrigued by all of our discussion about data and what's going on in the next waves in the NFL and how you marry data with, football knowledge and how meaning bring it together and how is that going to market you more as a potential scout in the CFL to the NFL. I was fascinated by their interest, and I love it because I think this goes in line with what we're saying. The evolution of football and data in the NFL and the CFL. You love your CFL. I think it's going to be a great thing. And I said to this group, Afram and the group, differentiate yourself always. And I would say that to our whole fan base, or listeners, whatever we're calling them, differentiate. There's a way to do that properly. And I'm going off on a little bit of a ramble here, but it excited me so much to see that group. It wasn't the older guys. The older guys, my guys that were my age, we all got along and we went out after. They weren't as interested. It's that younger group who know all about it. And I think it's or they want to know more about it.
Kudos to you for embracing that part. It's really funny. I said this to somebody the other day, and it might come off as hyperbolic, but I actually truly believe it. It was like Billy Beane was a baseball player. He was a baseball scout, and all he had was curiosity. Like, he didn't know how to code. And he had curiosity, and that, now he's considered one of the godfathers of baseball analytics. And, I think similarly, for somebody in your position, just the curiosity, I think, is going to, draw people to football in a way that is, you probably drew a lot of people to football in the last 20 years. And then, what if you were to, square that or cube that over the next, other decade, because this game has opened up to so many great people. Obviously, I'm really proud because, I'm not able to announce who it is, but one of my former interns just got a job in the NFL this last week, which makes 2 this year. And it's somebody who, the NFL, when we say something about football on Twitter, a lot of people are like, oh, well, you don't look like you played. And it's like, well, how about we open football up to people who didn't look like they played, because we can, get more and more people engaged in the game. And like for us at Sumer Sports and for the NFL at large, like the more people that care about football, obviously the better. And if we can be that vehicle for those people, I think that, it'll be tremendous. And I think the game has improved so much as a result of it.
Well, one of your young contemporaries, I'd call him. We just need to give him a shout out. We gave him a shout out in the team meeting today. The fact that Parker Fleming, secured his doctorate this past week. I love that. It's such a cool thing. He adds to your ranks of PhDs that know football because he played football and he has a cool understanding of it as well.
Yep.
And you guys should continue to listen to him. He and Eric are wildly intelligent, of course, and have a really cool understanding of football. So I love that. I love that for our group.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, first in football intelligence is where we're trying to get to. And I think I think that all of those words have to be stressed, football and intelligence. And I think that I think that we have the group that's most uniquely suited to do that. So I'm really excited. Like I said, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, tell one friend about the show so we can grow. And when we become big, you can tell everybody that you were here first. So For Thomas Dimitrov, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 53 of